Hey everyone, welcome back to Seeking Witchcraft. I'm your host, Ashley, and today I have on a return guest, Marshall. You may know him as the Witch of Southern Light on social media, or co host of the Southern Bramble podcast, or author of Cunning Words, a grimoire of tales and magic. Welcome back, Marshall, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. As I've said before, I'm a longtime listener, so I always look forward to your episodes when they pop up on my podcast list.
Oh, that's so sweet. And the fun part is the next episode that pops up is going to be this one.
Yes.
Well, today we're going to discuss Marshall's newest book, The Red Mother. Marshall, for those who don't know, before we kind of get into the book conversation, could you tell the listeners a bit about your background and what got you interested in the craft?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a queer Texas-based witch. A lot of my practice lies somewhere in the realm of like traditional witchcraft and folkloric witchcraft. Both my books really dive into the aspect of like narrative magic and like the bardic tradition of passing down information through the power of story. And that's always been really fascinating to me because history and mythology and folklore really inform my craft. I mean, it informs a lot of witchcraft, even trial records and, things written down about witches from the past that have become more prevalent in modern witchcraft and paganism. So that's the basis of where are the basis of my praxis. But I get into witchcraft when I was like 12, 13 years old. I was always obsessed with witches, witch movies, witch books, anything with magic in it, I devoured. So when I discovered that it was something that I could really practice, it was the 90s. So it was synonymous with Wicca at the time, at least what was prevalent in reading material that I had available. So I just started secreting away my lawnmower money and going to Books a Million, and my mom would drop me off at the mall, and I would literally just devour these books. And if I had enough, I would, be able to buy one and bring it home. And I still remember, Teen Witch by Silver Ravenwolf and To Fly a Silver Broomstick and Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, the big blue book everyone knows of.
Oh, yeah, Uncle Bucky's Big Blue Book.
Yes, to be perfectly honest, there's some pictures in there that probably weren't really appropriate for 12-year-olds, but
that's
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 neither
true.
here nor there now.
So, you started with kind of, we're talking about the 90s and the books that were available back then. And I know you're more interested, as you mentioned, towards like kind of the folklore stories that have evolved or meshed with the craft. So, how did you kind of find yourself on this path of leaning more towards that and not less away from like the 90s Wicca books, but
Mhm.
more towards like the traditional craft and like the folklore
Yeah.
aspect?
I want to say in my early 30s, I started exploring a little bit more and I started seeing things, of course, you start seeing things pop up on social media. TikTok
Hmm.
starts growing and with witch talk and everything like that. I, I wasn't really in the social media scene when it came to witch stuff or anything witchcraft related until my 30s. And all of a sudden I started seeing, like, in my opinion, what were a lot of things that were broken rules from when I was younger. I really didn't pick up a lot of witchcraft, but I took like almost a decade off practicing throughout my 20s. And when I got back into it, it felt like there was so much more available than what I had when I was younger. And I started to just explore a little more. And I remember reading this book where all of a sudden someone mentioned the witch's devil, and I was like, oh, devil. There is no devil in the craft. Absolutely not. And then the more I started to read and explore what existed, what was out there, the more I started realizing, like, oh, I have only been exposed to a very specific subset of the practice of witchcraft. And I started diving into a lot of Gemma Gary's material. She's out of Cornwall and she's, built her own tradition. And I started reading Traditional Witchcraft by Gemma Gary, The Devil's Dozen, The Black Toad, which of course was very influential even to this book, The Red Mother. Also, I really loved Keldon's The Crooked Path. They did a really beautiful job of breaking down a lot of barriers around what I thought the limits of witchcraft were to myself personally, and really gave me a good generality in traditional witchcraft, especially in applied to me as an American. It's a wonderful book. I'd really recommend it to almost anyone out there who wants to learn about it and get their beginner's chops in traditional craft. And it's interesting because traditional in itself carries its own weight as a word, you know. That doesn't mean that it's the original tradition. It just means it's a tradition or a type of being inspired by traditions that came before and then having the ability to adapt it to your own landscape. The more I read, the more I felt like this feels like home. This feels like something I'm really my interest is very piqued by. I had a lot of religious trauma growing up, and the somewhat subversive aspect and more transgressive aspect of traditional and folkloric witchcraft really, really spoke to me because it gave me the freedom and power to kind of stamp back at that trauma that I grew up with and kind of, you know, blow back in its face a little bit.
Oh yeah, I can understand the religious trauma growing up Catholic, so I am
Yes,
right there with you.
you understand.
Oh yes. So with you practicing more traditional witchcraft,
Mhm,
how do you like being a solitary practitioner? I feel like I get a lot of messages from people looking for covens or
mhm,
asking what it's like to be in a coven, and I feel like a lot of beginners kind of want to just pivot immediately to working with a group, but
mhm.
I've really appreciated on your social media side that you are a solitary practitioner and you're like proud of that and you're like very strong in that, and that I think it's so great to see that because I think sometimes people are worried to like be solitary by themselves, and that's why they look for a group because it's easier sometimes to learn with others. But I think it's so empowering to be solitary. That said, if you're not solitary anymore, my bad.
No,
but
no, that's
but
no, that's it's true. I am a solitary practitioner. My craft is very personal to me, and I've had some weird and very interesting experiences practicing with other people, but never in a way where I felt like, ooh, I like this. I want to do it once a month. If I were to find myself in a position where naturally I started to gravitate towards people in my life that we had this synchronicity in our craft, if that makes sense, or at least in how we
Mhm.
like to practice. I wouldn't necessarily say it's out of the question for me, but my witchcraft has always been sort of me and the spirits. And it's been very exploratory and experimental. And I've just kind of felt like I've never really, I'm fiercely introverted. And so I've never really felt the need to, or desire to go out and seek another large group, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, and I think that's so empowering, and it's such it's such a good strength that I think a lot of people are afraid to kind of activate within themselves. But
Yeah,
I do agree with you. You know, when it comes to witchcraft, a lot of times, yeah, it is you and the spirits, and having a group can be a beneficial way of contacting the spirits and having shared experiences. But
absolutely.
at the end of the day, for a lot of people, this is a religion. I know it is for me, and my personal practice is different than what I do with my coven. And sometimes people see it as the same. The only
Hmm.
practice they have is with their coven. But anywho, I asked this because it is related to the books that you have written,
Yeah,
traditional witchcraft, and the stories that are in it. So, with that said, I want to ask if you could give us a brief summary of your first book before we discuss your newest one.
absolutely. Well, my first book is a collection of, it's kind of in three parts. It is a grimoire in itself. It is a collection of stories, poems, and practical magic and spellcraft. And I was very, like I said, I'm very inspired by the narrative. I'm very inspired by the idea of magic being told and learned through the power of a story. I actually I did go ahead and pull up the description of that's on the back of the book, so I'll go ahead and share that if that sounds good with you guys or y'all.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a book of witchcraft in three parts. Part one is a collection of stories that connect the seeker to folklore and tales inspired by witchery and lessons written within. Part two is a collection of rhymes that teach specific acts of witchcraft, as well as recipes and petitions. Part three is a working guide on using the information provided to build upon your own personal practice, as well as charms, rites, curses, and extrapolated from the cunning tales. This book is for the most cunning. It has been written for the beginner and adept alike. The tales within will introduce you to spirits old and new, the three mothers, the three wise healers, the seven holy siblings, and so much more.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So without giving too much away, because I know there's some interlinking between the two books,
Yes.
what message do you hope readers, or theme do you hope that readers will take away from your first book?
You know, I find myself very inspired by the power of a story. I feel like when I can create an emotional connection to something, someone, something that touches me on not just a physical level, but an emotional level, I feel like I can connect with it a lot deeper. It affects me not only as a collection of information, but more so on a way where it embeds itself into my psyche. And I think sometimes the power of a well written story, a well read story, something that leaves you emotional and touched and moved or horrified, it is something that affects you in a way that leaves you changed afterward. And being a witch and going through my own personal initiation, there is something that changed within me. And I wrote these books and have more eventually to add to the collection that are meant to touch you as a reader in a way that leaves you feeling affected and changed. Something has rearranged inside of you after taking in these stories, after meeting the spirits within, after working these acts of magic. There is something different about you. And there is something different about me after writing them.
I think that's a great explanation, and I think that that's a fantastic way of explaining to your own initiatory experiences within yourself of just being in the craft. I mean, a lot of times when people go through initiations, it's to enact change, and
Mhm.
I I have been there, so
Yeah.
I totally understand what you were saying. Yeah, there absolutely is a change before you get into this world, and once you kind of take like that big deep step and look behind the curtain, and you kind of can't unsee the things that you see or unhear the things you hear, so on and
Oh,
so
yeah.
forth. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic theme. And if anybody listening wants to hear our discussion on the first episode of my podcast is season 6, episode 5. It's called Cunning Words, a Grimoire of Tales and Magic with Marshall WSL, which is Southern Light.
Oh, thank you.
Of course, of course. If anybody wants to hear the discussion on that, the first book was fantastic. I read it. I really, really enjoyed it. So
Thank you.
definitely recommend. And if anybody's interested in purchasing the first book, I'll have a link in the episode description where you can go ahead and purchase this book. So, we are going to start talking about the newest book, which is the meat of this episode. But before we do that, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back in a moment. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing so your money has a chance to grow for you, your kids, and your retirement. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorn lets you invest with the spare change you've got right now. You can start with just $5 or even just your spare change. Setting up an account is straightforward and quick. You could take a few minutes today to begin exploring what investing might look like for you. Acorns also simplifies the process so you don't have to feel like financial wellness is overwhelming. With its automatic features, you can start creating opportunities for your money to work for you, one small step at a time. For 2025, my biggest goal is to be more financially responsible and intentional about setting money aside. And I'll admit, investing has always felt a little intimidating to me, but Acorns has made it much more accessible. Every time I make a purchase, Acorn automatically rounds up the spare change and sets it aside to invest. It's reassuring to know that even small contributions could have the potential to make a difference over time. If you've been looking for an easy way to explore investing and start working towards your financial goals, check out Acorns today. It just might be the thing to help you take that first step. Head to acorns.com/Ashley or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorn Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/Ashley. Okay, welcome back. So let's talk about The Red Mother. What is this book about?
So, this is I've coined a new word. I think it's a new word. It's kind of like a mixture of a prequel slash alongside quill, if you
Okay.
will. It is a continuation of the Cunning Words collection, and it does continue to teach the acts of magic through story, but it takes one specific spirit, one character from the first book, the Red Mother, and it really expands upon her lore. She is actually inspired by a real life person and collection of people that were called Old Mother Redcap out of England. And I was first introduced to this in the book The Black Toad by Gemma Gary. She broke down this collection of magics collected in West Country England into three categories: our Old Mother Redcap, Old Mother Greencap, and Old Mother Blackcap. And those eventually became characters and spirits that or archetypes that I wrote about in my first book. And when I wrote it, the character of the Red Mother stood out to me in a way where I felt like I'm not done here yet. And as soon as I finished cutting words, I immediately started the Red Mother because I felt like her stories were coming to me and it was faster than I could write it down sometimes.
Sometimes the spirits just have a lot to say, and you just have
Yes.
to be like, all right, well, the timing's not great, but here we are.
Absolutely. And Old Mother Redcap was a term used for charmers, alewives, cunning women back in the day. Did originate from a specific one, which I talk about in the introduction if you want to give it a read sometime, all listeners out there. But it became a colloquialism for this type of practitioner. And I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the concept of the Loric Witch of the Woods. And that is who the Red Mother became in my stories. I do have the description here, so I can give a little bit more of about this book specific, if that sounds good to you.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So the Red Mother is an exploration of the witch's journey into their power. Through tale and rhyme, learn the craft of weaving charms, enchantments, and spirit work. Read of pacts made at crossroads, knots of power tied, twisted wishes, and death defying miracles. Let the Red Mother guide you. Her tale, her spirit, her odyssey is written within for the most cunning to discern and adapt. This volume continues the Cunning Words Grimoire tradition of teaching the craft through narrative as well as a manual of rites. The practical magic and unique catalog of spirits within is inspired by the folkloric witch and historic compendiums of spirit conjuration. The history of spirit conjuration exists within folklore as well, of course, as within ceremonial magic. This is something that we have lots of books in existence. We have, the Black Pullet, the Greater and Lesser Key of Solomon. We have the Grimorium Verum. We have the Book of Oberon. We have a lot of these historical and ancient magic grimoires and books that discuss aspects and rituals of conjuring spirits. Many of them are products of their time, and a lot of modern practitioners find different ways to adapt them. I was very, very inspired by these grimoires, and I wanted to show the reader how a witch would go through the process of going through initiation, taking back their power in a powerless situation, and then going on the actual journey of discovering how to use that power, how to work with it, how to coax it out. And there are stories that teach you how to create a witch's cord, how to do witch's knots, how to create this charm, how to enchant something. And then, of course, there are 13 spirits in the back, in the compendium of spirits, that are written about in these stories. And you see the way that she is approached by someone or finds herself in a situation where it is necessary to conjure a spirit for something or someone. And a lot of times when we read these grimoires, especially through history, it's very much a manual. There are no, if you make this mistake, this might happen. There are no, let's throw out a story about how this might happen or go wrong or go right, or what the outcome might be if you conjure the spirit. And I feel like that's one of the biggest questions about people who get into historic grimoire work really start to have. I mean, it's very much a FOFO situation, right? And a lot of new practitioners are very, very weary of ideas of backfiring or things going wrong. And I wanted to show in these stories what happens when you possibly make a mistake, when you do something right, when you try to figure out, okay, what ingredients do I need for this and why? And the stories do a really good job of showing the situations that the Red Mother is in, and then relating them to a lot of real everyday life experiences.
I just want to say I love that you called it the FAFO experience.
Yeah.
The fuck around, find out
It really is.
experience. I think that is such a honestly, that's just witchcraft in general is the FAFO
Yeah,
experience.
absolutely.
In a simple phrase. Yeah, no, I was gonna mention. So one of the things I really love about your first book and this book is that I love the book format. It's so unique in the sense of it has these short mini stories that have these like themes and lessons to be learned and practical ways of seeing how things are done, and then you have these other parts like this part two and part three that have spells and they have conjurations, and I think that's so unique. I haven't seen a lot of books that do things like that, and it's a really cool way of having a book in this realm of the craft and having like for readers to be able to absorb this information. So I just want to commend you for that because I do think this is like such a unique approach, and I think it works so well, especially with the stories that you're telling in this as well.
Well, thank you. And a lot of the stories are either a lot of them are inspired by my real life experiences. A lot of them involve queer characters, non-binary characters, characters who are facing acts of strife and oppression, and just very much real life things that we are all going through. And a lot of times when we read a lot of old mythology, it feels very ancient and it feels very over there. And I wanted to put stories out in the world that have this feeling of being old and of yesteryear, but of very applicable to today's political environment. Like I said before, a lot of these old grimoires, they're very Christianized, or they're using a lot of I don't even hesitate to say they use a lot of like appropriated Hebrew, or
Oh,
a
absolutely.
Christianized idea about what Kabbalistic magic is. And I have feelings about that. And I personally, after reading a lot of, the Lesser and Greater Keys of Solomon, and a lot of the supplication of invocation of God, and for me, again, because of some of my own personal religious trauma, it just doesn't jive with me in the same way. So I wanted to put something out there that felt like it gave that spirit conjuration, the practice of spirit conjuration, without the supplication to, not necessarily to a higher power, but more so to the church. That was really important to me. It feels like these are witchcraft conjurations, not necessarily ceremonial magicians conjurations.
Yeah, and looking at the history of those who engaged in ceremonial magic, high magic, those were
Hmm.
typically white men of power who had a
Hmm.
lot of money and a lot of influence that were able to
Yeah.
do things like, especially some of the materials that you need for their conjurations. I mean, even
Hmm.
by today's standards, it would be very difficult to get if just from cost alone, let
I
alone
don't have the
source.
pelt of a lion.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a scepter made of lead or gold.
And and like I said, some of them, at the times that they were written, whether that be the 14th, 15th, 16th, or 18th century, you can tell how affected they were by the political climate of the time. So, because the magics themselves were around a time period where the church ran supreme, it was an empire. That's the type of magic you see in there. That's the type of things that people are that was the lives that people were living at the time that this book was written and existed. And so in my book, Cunning Words and The Red Mother, you'll read a story, and in the back you might notice an author's note that explains the very real modern day experience I had that led me to need this type of magic, to want to put this type of magic out there, that inspired or created the crux of this story.
One of my favorite mini stories that you have in here was The Witch and the Madame, which touches on selling your body, and you touch
Yes,
on it being sex work. But I love how you explain that in addition to sex work, we sell our bodies every day.
every day.
Whether you are sitting at your computer typing away for 8 hours a day at your job, you're selling your brain power, you're selling the muscle dexterity in your hands that
Hmm.
over time it gets worn down. Yeah, I loved how you have the author notes as well, and I know that was something you had in the first book as well that I really appreciated, because I think it helps tie the readers into what you were hoping they can get out of it, but also sometimes you have little clues like, make sure you catch everything in this story, because sometimes people skim very fast through a story and might not catch the little details you have here and there that lead to a bigger picture. So I did love that you included that in this book as well.
Thank you. There were little notes too in different places that reminded people, make sure you recognize this story as multi-layered. Not only is it telling a story, it's also giving you information about working this charm. Not only is it telling you how to work this charm, it's also giving you the information on how to adapt it to your local landscape. And when I say in the description that this book is for the most cunning, I mean that you will have to be cunning to adapt it. You will have to think a little bit outside the box sometimes. When a spirit conjuration says, three spirits of flora that coincide or with your intention, that means you may not be able, it's not going to list the exact three herbs you need, because it's going to force you to kind of ask yourself, okay, if I'm doing something for protection, I'm not just going to go get, my big book of correspondences out. Instead, I'm going to actually ask myself, okay, what grows in my natural landscape that gives me protection? There's a giant pine outside with pine needles that have a very, very strong sap and sharp points. That would be a wonderful representation of protection of wards. There's a giant oak that grows at the corner of my street. It's very old with wide, deep roots. An acorn from that tree would be a wonderful representation of the seed of protection or wisdom. I think a lot of times we're very, very used to predetermined lists of herbs, and then you get online and you're like, does anyone know a substitute for this herb? And I'm like, well, what are you using it for? Because that's really what it's about. It's not really about an exact substitute for one herb. It's more like, what's the purpose of your spell? What's the purpose of your charm? What local flora, what spirits of the local flora in your area coincide with that? What works with that? What represents that to you? So I want people to really use their noodle. I want you to get to know the landscape that you live in. I want you to go outside, take a walk if you can. Notice the dandelions that are growing in the cracks, of your sidewalk, or the clover that's fresh with morning dew. I want you to notice the type of trees that are growing in your area. What do they represent to you? What are they telling you when you smell them, when you touch them? Do they prick? Are they sticky? Are they furry? What do you associate that with? Because that's really what it comes down to, in my opinion, having that cunning knowledge.
I love that you explained it so well. It was funny. I was thinking about the flowers growing in the cracks of the sidewalk as well. But yeah, I love this idea that it's not just predetermined and that you kind of have to think and look
Mhm.
at what's around you. And this can also help you develop a relationship with your local spirits of the land.
Absolutely.
And I know some people may be listening to this and thinking, like, well, I live in an area that's not really like, that. There's not really a lot around here.
Mhm.
Trust me, I live off a very busy intersection myself, right
Oh, so
outside my
so
window.
do I. Mid-city.
Oh yeah, right outside my window. It's practically a highway, and cars are just coming down all the time. So I understand where people may be thinking, if this applies to somebody thinking of this, of course, but there are still spirits of the land, and sometimes you have to work a little harder to hear them.
Absolutely.
Sometimes they might be drowned out by the tractor trailers coming by, and that's okay.
The things you will find on the side of the highway, literally on the side of a highway, like there over by my work, there is an access road onto a main highway, and on the other side of it, I have found massive amounts of yarrow, of morning glory climbing up a wall, of dandelions, of all sorts of things that you know safely park your car and get out and pick some if you can. But everywhere we are, we can find something. And if you can't find it, you still have your local grocer. You can still go to your Dollar General, and you go to the spice section, and you can use your list of herbal correspondences. The Llewellyn's Complete Book of Herbal Correspondences is great. Scott Cunningham's Magical Herbs. You can use them if that's all that's available to you. But I want you to actually see what's available to you. Get to know your landscape. Take a walk, drive somewhere to a local forest, or maybe even just like a local park.
And these spirits want to be heard too.
They do.
They'll be very happy to have some. Well, I can't speak for all of them, but chances are they will be happy to help.
Absolutely.
One more question I have for you about the book. I already know the answer to this, but just in case for those listening, if they haven't, we haven't fully touched on this. But do readers have to read the first book to have a grasp on the second one?
It is of my opinion. I mean, I guess I wrote it, so it's okay to say that. It's of my opinion that I really think they should be read in order. The first book, Cunning Words, gives you the landscape. It lays out a collection of stories and poems that are basically like, this is the way you start. This is the first thing I'd like you to grasp and take in and fill up your psyche with. The second book, like I said, it's a prequel slash alongside quel. So it shows you her journey into her power through all of these a very winding tale of not only escaping from a tough situation, but traveling, falling in love, having your heart broken, getting a new job, deciding that you want to go off into the woods and live off of the land, and then the people who end up seeking you out for helping them. You're going through this path with her, and what you find is that a lot of these stories end up filling in the gaps from the first one. In the first one, she shows up several times throughout in different stories, kind of when she's needed. She helps people here and there. But what was she doing that led her there? How did she learn this magic? What was her initiation like? Why was she initiated? It fills in all these little contextual things that you didn't even know you were missing reading the first book. So some of these stories will literally be the thing that leads up to a story you've already read in Cunning Words, and you didn't even know that's what it's leading to. Some of these stories might be introducing you to a character that you've already been introduced to the latter years in the first book, that now you're going to get to see their younger years. It's going to kind of it's somewhat of a world building experience where you start to notice these this network of experiences that all these different people are having and how they end up connecting with each other on this landscape. Think of like a red thread on a murder board.
All right, folks. Well, you've heard it here. Read the first book.
Please do.
Yes. Well, Marshall, I have so many more things I want to ask you about this, but I don't want to take away from the mystique and the mystery from the readers that are definitely going to check out this book, because they absolutely should. So, with that, I would like to ask you just some very basic questions before we wrap up. So, one
Yeah.
of them is, what can we expect from you in the future?
Well, I am still writing. I'm taking a little break from writing too much right now. Actually, I don't think I've talked about this yet, so this will be a fun one to bring up. I actually wrote a second book alongside this that is entirely removed from the Cunning Words collection.
Ah,
Um,
fun.
I don't want to give too much away about it because I'm going to be editing it throughout the holiday and probably throughout the winter, possibly into spring. It is going to be a little bit more personal, and it's going to share aspects of my own life, my craft, stories of my history. I probably gave a little too much away already. Oh well, it's okay. It's something I'd like to put out next year as a sort of a break between this and then the next one. I do definitely have more books going into the Cunning Words collection. That's kind of my long term. I'm not gonna say my life's goal because hey, I'm only 38. I'm still getting into it, you know. But
You're
that's
still young.
definitely yeah. I'm still young. I'm really enjoying the process of exploring my writing. I didn't start writing. I mean, I wrote and did lots of art when I was younger, but I didn't really take it very seriously. I'm one of those people that never thought, oh, I'm never going to write a book. That sounds great, but I don't think I'd ever have the patience or power or ability to do it. And now I'm exploring this part of myself that I thought didn't exist, and now that I know it exists, I really want to push those boundaries. I want to test where it takes me. It's become a huge part of my craft. Creating something that didn't exist before, inspired by something old, but also kind of reaching for something new in the world of witchcraft. I think a lot of us are hungry for that, and I want to see if there's something I can contribute to it to the community.
Well, it just sounds like I'm gonna have to you back on to talk about your new products in the future.
I would love that.
Amazing. Well, as I mentioned, I will have the links for where to buy the first and the second book. Well, I mean, is the second book on pre-order or is it out officially?
It's out. It's
Oh,
been out.
okay, okay.
It came out October 1st. It's actually, I know this is a humble brag, but it's actually selling more copies faster than the first one did. So I'm
Ah.
so grateful. I'm self-published author. All the artwork in there is mine. The cover is mine. I have a friend who edited it. I cut his hair for free, and so you know when you buy my book, you are supporting me, a small artist and an independent author. It means the world to me if you reach out and tell me you bought my book, or you like my book, or you read a review on it, or you want to post about it. If you tag me in it, I will share it. I love when people share with me that they're reading my material, they're taking it in, they're applying it to their practice. That definitely means the world to me. And they both are out available on Amazon.
Perfect. Well, I will definitely have the Amazon links in here. And where could people find you as well? Actually, before I ask you that, sorry,
Mhm.
I have one more question for you.
Do it. No
I ask
question away.
I ask everybody at the end of the episodes, separate to anything that we've talked about today. What is one piece of advice that you would give to a beginner?
You know, I recently read a book that said something that I love, and it's very, very common in the chaos magic theory, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but it was something like nothing is true and everything is permitted. That is something that has really, really shifted my mind around the possibilities of what I can do in my craft. And I want new practitioners to remember that this is a lifelong practice. There is no race. You do not have to know everything at once, and everything you think you know will change in time. So enjoy what you learn. Know that while I hate to say that there are rules, but you can break them. But there are no rules, and you have to stick to them. You know, it's a very very jumbled complexity of thoughts when it comes to it. But I do like remembering that a huge part of what it means to be a witch and practice witchcraft is transgression, and that means recognizing that we have the power individually to test and push our boundaries and recognize that it's and honestly, like we said before, it really is about fucking around and finding out. And definitely don't want to throw out the consequences be damned, but recognize that we learn from these consequences and mistakes. I've learned dearly from some of mine, and I have had the privilege of sharing some of those in my writing. And I want people to test their boundaries and get. I think I actually heard someone say this on your podcast like years ago. Be promiscuous with your craft.
Yes, yes, that was Angela Z who said
Yes.
that.
I like that, consider that stolen. I say that all the time now. It is such a pivotal statement to me.
Oh yeah, no, she is a fantastic practitioner and has such an incredible advice. And that said, I also love your advice as well. I think
Thank
that
you.
that is a fantastic thing for beginners. I really, when I hear things like that, I really think about making an episode one day of just every single piece of advice everybody's ever given me on the episode or given the listeners, and just making that one episode,
Yes.
compiling that. It's like a
Snippet by
giant
snippet.
oh my gosh. Well, Marshall, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was such a pleasure to have you back. I'm looking forward to having you back in the future. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Witch of Southern Light. Forever how long we have TikTok, Witch of Southern Light, all one word. I think that's it. Oh, I do also have an Etsy shop with grimoire PDF grimoire pages and a Redbubble shop where I actually have a lot of my artwork that you can have printed on shirts, totes, coffee cups, all that sorts of stuff. And you can find the link in all of my profiles. It's the link tree. Check out that link tree. I want more people to go to it. Save it as an icon on your phone. It has lots of free advice. It has a whole list of herbal correspondences, crystal correspondences, how to create tinctures and extract spirits from herbs, magical days of the week, just lots of free information that you might have to have 6 books to find, and it's out there. I've collected in my link tree. You can check that out, and it's free for anyone to use.
Awesome. Well, I will have a link to the link tree in the episode description, as well
Yeah,
as I'll also put the links to your Instagram, Threads, and TikTok for however long we have that.
I know, right? And the link tree itself has all my links in there, as well as the links to Cunning Words and to the Red Mother as well. So that makes it really easy in one place.
Oh, perfect. Great. And if anybody wants to find me, you can find me on Instagram at Seeking Witchcraft. I have a personal Instagram if anybody's interested. It's Spells and Kettlebells. I am on YouTube, which I should probably make an announcement about that. But
Yeah,
I'm on YouTube at Seeking Witchcraft. I'm on Facebook at Seeking Witchcraft Podcast. And if you want to support the show, you could do so at Seeking Witchcraft, or you could do it at patreon.com/Seeking Witchcraft. Well, thank you again, Marshall, so much for coming on. I'm so excited to post this episode and hear what the listeners have to say about the book, because I certainly enjoyed it. So I know everybody else will as well,
thank you.
especially if they're already flying off the shelves at Amazon.
I'm so grateful to be on the show with you again. This means the world to me. I love listening to you, and I'm so grateful for the kind feedback, and I'm really, really, really happy you enjoyed it.
Oh, of course. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to the listeners for listening. And I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.